I've been involved with disaster response since 1996. Been to Puerto Rico twice for hurricanes, Guam for a typhoon. I was at the Pentagon for a month after 9/11 with the Red Cross. Went back to New York for a couple weeks after that, and responded to many smaller, although still disastrous, floods, fires, etc., around the country, and a lot in the Midwest. Being on the fire department has been an interesting challenge for me at times because of my multiple roles in disaster response. During the High Park fire, for example, one of the incident management team members came up to Glacier View. I knew him from having worked previously in Boulder County after the 4 Mile fires, and he was asking if I was going to become involved with Larimer County's disaster mental health response. And I said, no, I'm a firefighter up here. He said, yeah, I know, but like you did with Boulder County, are you going to be helping us with the long-range disaster mental health piece? And I said, I can't even think about that right now. I'm a firefighter here. So there are times when those two roles feel like they bump up against each other. But during the Hyde Park fire, my only concern was the fact that I was on the fire department, that our whole community was in jeopardy of burning down. And then following the actual Hyde Park fire burn here in Glacier View, I probably was as stunned as most other people in the community, so there was no capacity to provide mental health services for anybody else in the county. I had been assigned radio since the chief didn't think after a stem cell transplant I should be out on the line. And so I was handling all the base radios and all the radio communication at the fire department, and heard the tone change from, oh, you know, it was a Friday and we were hoping that all of Glacier View would be back in on Sunday, to put out an all hands page. We need everybody here as soon as possible. And we joined the rest of the federal teams out there fighting the fire as it jumped across. And it was really probably one of the most challenging parts for me, was being on the radios, listening to what was happening, and being unable to really see anything, to know anything other than really trying to make sure all our crews were safe during that time. It felt better to be here and to do whatever we could than even think of leaving. I mean, we just didn't. It wasn't like we had to stay, but we chose to stay. And so that did feel better. Being on the radios was tough, but it was way better than being in town and not knowing what was going on whatsoever. Partly because at least I knew I was doing my own tiny little piece, at least for my fellow firefighters out there working the fire, and for the community. And yeah, there is something psychologically about being able to have some information is certainly better than having none whatsoever. You know, being a survivor, and again, I don't consider myself a survivor like those who lost their homes. Sort of like, yes, I've had cancer, but I don't consider myself the same as somebody who went through chemotherapy, because I didn't go through chemotherapy. So I feel like I kind of took the easy way through cancer, just like maybe I took the easy way through surviving the Hyde Park fire. And I don't know that I would really, as I look back, I wouldn't really call those easy, but I wasn't affected as deeply as some people. But I know both those experiences, which were both close together as well, have left their imprint on me. And I think, if anything, just a deeper empathy and an appreciation for the strength that it takes to get through all of that recovery process, and as a service provider, wanting to do everything I can to enhance resilience. I sort of cocooned myself up here with my friends, and with other friends who could support my healing from what had taken place. And there's always that kind of survivor's guilt, I think, that occurs when most of my close friends lost their homes. I didn't, and I was a firefighter, and I struggled with all of that for quite a while. So I was sort of removed from the larger recovery effort. I was somewhat aware because I was still a Red Cross volunteer. I would hear bits and pieces of things, but I wasn't actively involved. And then I became involved again with the larger disaster community after the floods, because that's what I do, and I became more involved. And I hear things about how well the community came together after the High Park fire, and what wonderful recovery there's been from the High Park fire. And I always feel a little disconnect from that, because I don't know where that's coming from, and don't feel it's maybe extended as far as Glacier View. I don't feel like, and again, a lot of my information is sketchy from my very own personal perspective, which I know is biased. I did not feel as though the efforts for recovery reached as far into this community as they did farther down, closer to Fort Collins. Disaster response is the good part. Disaster recovery is long, ugly, and difficult. And so one of my efforts these days is to try to find a way to make that a little more hopeful and more easily navigated by people who have already been hit by the disaster. Seeing how my friends struggled through that recovery process, and the hoops and the tons of paper that can be involved in insurance claims and getting benefits related to the disaster, prompted me to come up with an idea to help with the floods. And I developed an intensive case management program that I actually took to Serve 6.8, who got a grant to get the program funded, which would provide people to work much more intensely with people who are overwhelmed by the whole experience, and sit and work with them with the paperwork, going through the hoops, because some people just can't manage all that it takes to access benefits following a disaster. And I think, if anything, the experience I had watching and listening to and being a part of my friends' experiences struggling with that whole process has prompted me as a social worker to really want to help disaster survivors be able to better navigate that process. And they need help. They need way more help than the traditional models provide for. Most of the people I know realize we assume the risk in living up here. If we live up here, we have mountain lions that can eat our pets. If we live up here, we can have fires that will burn down our property. One of the bigger problems is, I don't think people ever before thought about the fact that by living up here, we might be denied by insurance companies for affordable insurance coverage. That's been a change since the disasters. That's a risk, I think, that is beginning to keep people out of the area, which we all make our choices. And so I don't think we're going to control nature. I think we have to educate people, and we make the decisions to assume whatever risk we will take.